Hello there, people of the internet. I am out here with my Cimarron 1872 Colt open top. This particular one is chambered in 38 special, and I already made a video on it, but I wanted to go ahead and make another video on it. Alright, before we get started, I want to say thank you to the Patreons. Obviously, this stuff right here is not free, and it does cost money. If you want to help support the content that I make, then hey, go ahead and check out Patreon and Utreon, links in the description below. Basically, I just wanted an excuse to come out here and actually shoot this thing. And I was thinking to myself, what video could I make on these right here? And a buddy of mine was actually talking to me about it, and he brought up a really good idea, and he said, hey, why don't you make a video on how revolvers are obsolete? And I was like, yeah, that's a sensitive topic right there, and people seem to get their jimmies rustled whenever you dislike something that they wholeheartedly enjoy beyond, all reasonable doubt. So, I am going to make this video and talk about what makes revolvers obsolete. Now, that being said, before you go typing down in the comments all angry and whatnot, obsolete does not mean bad. Like, whenever I say something's obsolete, they're like, oh, I could still do the job with this and that and the other thing. Obsolete does not mean bad. Obsolete literally means that we just have newer, better technology that can achieve the same job in an easier manner. And by that aspect, yes, revolvers are obsolete in comparison to auto-loading firearms. If you have, if you want to shoot something, yeah, if you want to shoot something, then by all means you can use a flintlock musket to put lead down range and hit that target. And I mean, the flintlock musket is definitely obsolete, but it will still do the job. Or if we're not even talking about firearms, if you need to hammer in a nail, then you can absolutely do that with like a rock or something. But nowadays we have like nail guns and drills to screw in screws and whatnot. We just have better technology to achieve the things in an easier manner. So whenever I say something is obsolete, I am not saying that it is bad. People get so broken-hearted whenever something that they enjoy is called, is termed obsolete. And it's not a bad term, guys. It just means that it's old school technology. Now, that being said, not all revolvers are the same. I'm going to point that out right now. There's people out there who can, say, hey, Jerry Michalik can, run a revolver extremely quickly. Go check him out. Well, yeah, if you have Jerry Michalik skills and can run a revolver the way that he does, then by all means, you go ahead and you do that. But, now that being said, Jerry Michalik, whenever he runs his revolvers fast, he runs very fast revolvers. Revolvers that break open or have a cylinder that swings out of the frame tend to be much faster than revolvers like this single action right here, which are gate-loaded. Gate-loaded revolvers, this right here requires you to open a gate, half-cock the hammer, and manually load individual chambers. And as you go through, load one round at a time. It's just not a very fast process. Whenever these were replacing cap and ball revolvers, which is, an entirely different story on how these came to be. This is why the open top transitional revolver exists. Whenever these were replacing cap and ball revolvers, my goodness gracious, this was reloading extremely fast. Whoever was down there was still pouring powder into their chamber, and you had a revolver with 5 shots in it ready to take on whatever it is that you're going to be taking on. I'm not going to go in depth on why 6-shot revolvers hold 5 shots. There's just a lot of things that go on with that. But a lot of your revolvers that break open and swing open and whatnot that give you access to the entire cylinder at once, you can use speed loaders on those, and you could reload those actually fairly quickly. The capacity on them tends to be pretty limited because you have this circular set of chambers inside of the cylinder, and the projectiles are, X amount of size, and you can only cram so many of those inside of that cylinder before geometry says you can't cram any more in there. And if you want to cram more in there, then you have to use smaller cartridges. not really the end of the world with that, but typically your revolvers, unless they're like really small cartridges, are going to run anywhere from 6 to 8 shots, whereas your semi-automatics can have, you know, external magazines that can load as many shots as you want. I've seen 100-round drums for Glocks, so capacity is definitely one of the biggest limiting factors whenever it comes to revolvers. But you can reload them very quickly if you have a revolver that has access to the entire cylinder. I would say a revolver that either breaks open or swings open is a lot less obsolete than one of these old school, old style revolvers. This right here is obviously based off of the old style cap and ball revolver. A lot of times whenever I show people this, that's what they think it is. They're just like, oh, it's an old cap and ball revolver. And I'm like, no, this is a cartridge firing gun. They're like, oh, it was a conversion thing. And I'm like, nah, technically this right here is a transitional model. It was, I mean, there's a long history behind the 1872 open top that I'm not really going to get into here. But this old style of revolver is just a lot slower than the modern style of revolver that breaks open or swings out, or whatever system it is that you're wanting to use, the system where you have access to all of the chambers in the cylinder at once. And those are a lot less obsolete, like I said, than one of these right here. Now, revolvers that don't have much in terms of safety systems in them, I also deem obsolete, because the capacity on these old guns is actually less than what you would have on a modern gun. There is no transfer bar in these. There's no transfer bar, and there's no hammer safety system. If you have your hammer down and you're carrying this thing with 6 rounds in all of the cylinders, then you're going to have the firing pin built directly into the hammer, resting back on the back of a primer, and it's just, you bump that hammer, that round goes off, and you have yourself, you know, a wound in your leg or appendix or wherever it is that you're keeping this thing. Definitely not the safest of designs. There are revolvers out there that have like a half notch, or not a half notch, well, technically yes, half notch. Those are unreliable. Do not rely on those for safety. But a lot of your old style revolvers will have like a notch cut in the cylinder to where you can actually rest your hammer on that notch and the cylinder won't move. Mostly those are with your older style cap and ball revolvers, and you don't really see those with modern style cartridge firing revolvers, just because of the geometry of what is required to put that in there. So that's one of the biggest things with cartridge firing revolvers like this, is compared to the cap and ball revolver. Now I will say, I think we can all agree at this point that cap and ball revolvers are, of course, obsolete, unless, of course, you want to talk about your ability to speed load cap and ball revolvers, because you can always just, you know, pull that old cylinder off, toss a new one on real quick. I've seen people who can do that exceptionally fast. And if you have multiple cylinders, especially if you're rocking something like an 1858 new model Army, where, you know, you just pull that little what would I call it, retaining pin forward, cylinder comes out, slap a new one in, you can reload those very, very quickly versus having to sit there and load one ball at a time. You can definitely reload those much faster than you can reload something like this with a loading gate, trying to load them one at a time, unless you don't have multiple cylinders for whatever revolver it is that you want to run. There's so many different options out there. I could sit here and like come up with all different sorts of scenarios all day long about what would and would not be a good situation with these revolvers. I wouldn't call modern revolvers obsolete per se. I would call them more so obsolescent. Just because if you use like speed loaders and whatnot, I mean, there's ways to get around the limited capacity of a revolver, and using these speed loaders and whatnot is probably the easiest way to be able to do that. So I wouldn't call modern style revolvers that gives you access to the entire cylinder, I wouldn't call those obsolete. But something like a gate loader where you have to go through and load one single round at a time, these are definitely obsolete. I basically just got this because this is absolutely my style of revolver. I wanted an open top and a modern cartridge that I could actively shoot, specifically 38 Special, because I have the equipment to load this ammunition. That being said, we're standing out here at about this distance, 35, 40 yards, somewhere in there. I have 5 rounds inside of this revolver here. The 1872 open top, although this isn't really a history lesson with these right here, in comparison to the 1860, which this is obviously based off of, the rear side is actually on the top of the barrel, whereas originally it would be on the top of the hammer here that you would line up. As a result of the 1860s being on the top of the hammer and the 1851s at that particular point in time, these revolvers were notorious for shooting high. But since this right here is right on top of the barrel, this right here actually shoots right at point of aim. These Cimarron 1872 open tops are actually known for being spot on in terms of their accuracy. Readjust my grip here. All right, let's send some lead down range. These right here are just 158 grain projectiles. They're just cast lead bullets. Thank you, Kevin. And those who don't know who Kevin is, he's my peacock. I got 4 of them. They're all named Kevin. If this is your first time on the channel, then hey, welcome to the channel. Let's send another round down range. That one felt a little spicier than the others. These are hand loads that I'm firing here. What was I gonna say here? Oh yeah. I think that primarily single action revolvers are going to be deemed more obsolete than double action revolvers, because double action, you can lay down some really fast fire versus something like this, which you have to manually cock the hammer back every single time you want to pull that trigger and actually fire. Now that being said, most people are going to have an easier time accurately shooting something in single action than double action, just because the trigger is a lot nicer. Double action, you're fighting that hammer spring, and it's just way more difficult to put rounds down on range accurately whenever you're doing that. Man, this is a really nice shooting revolver. I don't want to, I know, oh god, I don't want to call it obsolete, but I know it is. But boy, is it accurate. And then to unload this bad boy, you're just gonna half cock. There's gonna be one empty cylinder right there. Come on now, get off my face. It's Florida, guys. I got like gnats and whatnot buzzing all over my face on the video I made earlier today. I had a freaking silkworm fall from the tree onto my hat here. It was like dangling down, and gotta love Florida. The other day I made a video where I was chasing around a peacock with this old revolver. And I think that's the first time a Florida man's ever chased a peacock with an 1872 Colt open top. With these right here, you have to go through just one round at a time and eject them out of the cylinder. And I'm very nervous with this one because the Cimarron 1872 open top actually has on the ejection housing for the ejection rod right here on the side of the barrel. This was originally extremely sharp, and I cut the absolute hell out of myself whenever I was making the video on this thing. My last video that I made on these things. I since went through and doled it up, but I'm not sure how much I doled it. I'd like to think that I doled it quite a bit, but I'm not positive about that, and I won't find out until I screw up and rub my finger against it again, because I am not eager to test how sharp that is. But man, it was razor sharp. I like filleted myself on that thing whenever I was running it on the last video. That was whenever I was back running this revolver at 100 yards. These guys can be accurate, don't get me wrong. Revolvers are incredibly accurate, and they tend to lend themselves to having more powerful rounds than semi-automatics, just because of the nature of the design of having something that doesn't operate under its own recoil and its own pressures, something that doesn't operate itself, something that's manually operated like a revolver. There's nothing to move around. There's no parts of the gun to beat itself to death like you do with a semi-automatic. And typically with semi-automatic handguns, there's just so much that you can do. I mean, you got like the Desert Eagle, which operates on a gas system, but there's so much that you can do to get powerful rounds. That's why revolvers most of the time are going to be what your more powerful rounds are going to be chambered in, like your 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum and whatnot. Okay, let's go ahead and send another 5 rounds downrange because I went through the trouble of loading this up. I'm just gonna grab my revolver here. This right here, the grip profile on this is a little bit different than I'm used to, so you'll see me like try and readjust myself here. But it's still definitely manageable. Let's send some lead. Ah, I love this thing. These 158 grain projectiles that I have here, I have them loaded like to standard pressures, but this revolver is quite hefty, and the recoil coming out of these is damn near non-existent. Like, I've had 38 specials that have kicked way worse than this thing right here, and this thing is stupid accurate too. I say as I miss. There we go, I got it that time. Alright, there's our 5 rounds, and now, half cock, come on over here to this first chamber here, and just one at a time, we're going to sit here and very carefully not carve our finger on the ejection rod housing there. The brass cases here have oil on them, so they're not ejecting quite as nicely as they normally would if they didn't have oil on them. And just like that, yeah, there's definitely way faster revolvers out there than some of these old school ones. So I would call these obsolete. I wouldn't call, like I said, I wouldn't call modern ones obsolete. I just hit that cut on my thumb. Oh man, that is painful. I wouldn't call modern revolvers obsolete. I would just call them obsolescent because we do have better options. But if you know how to run one of those really well, then they would make a pretty decent option. But I mean, there's people out there who can run bolt actions as fast as, you know, people that can only mildly run semi-automatics and whatnot. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. I love watching matches where people like run bolt actions and they'll run them so well that they're keeping up with a lot of the people running semi-automatics and whatnot. Now, of course, they're not going to be as effective as somebody who is actually effective with semi-automatics. Like, for example, got yourself a revolver of any kind, whether or not it's one of these old-style gate-loading revolvers or whether or not it's one of the revolvers that breaks open or has a cylinder that swings out. Anyone who is competent with those is still going to be less effective than anyone who is competent of equal skill level with a semi-automatic, just because the semi-automatics, especially one that is chambered or one that has a capacity that is a decent amount, like most of your semi-automatics nowadays that are duty quality or that are duty sized, are going to be like 18 plus rounds, which is 3 times the amount that most of your revolvers are going to be capable of carrying. And that's just the nature of the beast. That's just the nature of the design. And yes, you can reload revolvers pretty quickly, especially if you have speed loaders, but having to reload 3 times is still not going to be as effective as a semi-automatic, which you would only have to load once. So I'm not saying that they're bad. I am saying that they are just not as good as what technology has nowadays. Now, that being said, I still feel like that there's going to be some people out there who have their jimmies rustled by this. Just wait until the M5 and the M250 come out and I start talking about how the M249 and the AR-15 are obsolete. That's going to make a lot of people upset. And people just assume that obsolete means bad. They are absolutely not bad. Hell no, they are not bad at all. But they are not as good as the newer technology that we're coming out with. Like, for example, I don't freaking know, the number 4 Mark I Lee Enfield, right? That is a fantastic rifle. 303 British, man, that is a potent round. 10-round magazine, as long as you load it properly so you don't have rim lock or anything like that. And just the way the mechanics of that rifle are, you can run that rifle extremely quickly. It is just a phenomenal rifle, but it is absolutely obsolete in terms of a battle rifle if we're talking comparing it to modern day equipment. Just my 2 cents on the subject. Anyway, folks, thanks for watching. I definitely had a really good time, and I'm just so pleased with this thing. This is the second video that I've made on this so far. Hopefully I'll remember to upload the first one before I upload this one, but that doesn't always happen. I am very happy that I got the chance to come out here and run this thing. I've ran probably about, I don't know, 50 rounds through this thing so far. You know, rough approximations, rough guesstimations, because I'm just kind of grabbing from a bag of reloads that I have. And I mean, it is accurate. And I'm making shots on target. Hell, I was out at 100 yards filming the other video that I made on this thing, and I was making my shots out at 100 yards with this thing. The one big gripe that I have with it, it cut the hell out of me. But that's not a fault of the design of the revolver. That's just a fault of Cimarron having the ejection rod housing razor sharp. And I mean, it's pretty easy to fix. So, I'm not going to go in depth on that though. I will, however, say, hey folks, thanks for watching. I do appreciate your time. Like the video if you like the video. Description down below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go ahead and go check that out. Subscribe to the channel if you feel like watching more stuff like this, because as you can see from the car down there, I do this kind of stuff all the time. Alright, that being said, you guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day, and like I said, thanks for watching.
Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.